forgotten house sits at the edge of Briar Hollow, abandoned for decades, yet every night a faint light flickers behind its cracked windows. One stormy night, she disappeared without a trace. No screams, no witnesses, only a single handprint burned deep into the wooden door. Since then, anyone who enters the house claims they feel someone standing inches behind them, breathing softly into the darkness. The beam trembled as though reacting to something unseen, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then I heard it. Slow footsteps on the staircase, each creak dragging down toward me. I lifted my light, and she stood at the bottom of the steps, Alara, her eyes hollow, her lips moving without sound. A cold whisper brushed against my ear. "You shouldn't have come." Behind me, her silent whisper rose into a trembling, broken wail. Desperate, I smashed through a window and escaped into the night. When I turned back, the house was dark again, perfectly still.
The old Willowmere Bridge had been closed for years. Yet every night at exactly 2:13 a.m., people claimed to hear a child crying beneath it. Curious and foolish, I went to see for myself. The moment I stepped onto the bridge, the air turned icy. A thick fog rolled out from beneath the planks. I leaned over the railing, shining my light down into the darkness. That's when the crying stopped. A small voice behind me whispered, "Can you help me?" Slowly approaching me, my breath caught as a figure formed out of the fog. A little girl in a soaked dress, hair dripping, face pale as moonlight. She lifted her head, and where her eyes should have been were empty, black hollows. Something massive moved beneath the bridge, the planks trembling under my feet. A distorted face, twisted, drowned, and impossibly large, rose from the darkness below. I ran, but the girl's voice followed me, echoing through the night. "Don't leave me again."
Everyone in town avoided the old Marrowby school after sunset, claiming the classrooms echoed with voices long after the building was abandoned. Wanting proof, I slipped inside one night, the halls silent and lined with lockers covered in peeling paint. When I turned, the hallway was empty, but all the locker doors were slightly open. None of them had been like that when I walked past. I stepped into an old classroom, and the door slammed shut behind me. Desks began dragging across the floor, scraping their metal legs in a deafening circle around me. In the corner of the room stood a teacher's silhouette, tall, thin, motionless, its face hidden by the shadows. Then, slowly, it lifted its hand and pointed at me. The lights flickered violently, and in the flashes I saw the figures of children sitting at the desks, all staring with hollow eyes and stitched mouths. The last thing I heard before the lights went out was the sound of every child's desk opening, all at once.
Wanting answers, I checked in through the broken lobby door and climbed the dusty staircase. The hallway smelled of mildew and something far worse, like old breath trapped in the walls. Room 207, the one with the light, stood slightly open. I pushed it wider, and the bulb inside flickered weakly over a bed that looked recently slept in. On the nightstand sat an old rotary phone, its receiver off the hook. My pulse thudded as footsteps began pacing in the room above. Slow, heavy, deliberate, but the motel only had one floor. I backed toward the door, but the room stretched deeper, as if the walls were breathing, swallowing space. Its head twitched at an unnatural angle, and with every flicker of the light, it appeared closer. First across the room, then halfway, then right behind me. The light snapped off, and in the pitch black, something cold pressed its face against mine and exhaled.
The old Belwick train station had been closed since the accident. An entire train vanished inside the tunnel during a foggy night, leaving nothing but twisted rails and unanswered questions. Curious, I snuck in after dark, the air thick with the smell of rust and damp concrete. My footsteps echoed through the empty station until a distant sound made me freeze, the faint chime of a station bell. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered on, illuminating the abandoned platform. A train stood there, silent and dust-covered, as if it had materialized from thin air. Its doors slid open with a groan that scraped against my bones. Against every instinct, I stepped inside. Rows of empty seats stretched ahead, but each one held a dark, human-shaped shadow, motionless yet staring in my direction. Their whispers grew louder, merging into a single chilling word: stay. The last thing I saw before the lights died was my own reflection in the window. But behind me, dozens of hands reaching.
I found the diary in the attic of an abandoned house at the edge of town. Its pages yellowed and brittle, but the words freshly written. He's watching. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old floorboards sounded like footsteps pacing outside my bedroom door. Around midnight, a shadow passed across the wall, stretching impossibly long, though no windows or lights were near it. I froze as a whisper slipped under the door. "I've been waiting for you." My heart pounded as the temperature dropped, my breath forming foggy clouds in the pitch-black room. Slowly, the diary's pages began to flip on their own, stopping at a blank page that now held fresh writing. "Now it's your turn." I screamed as something cold and skeletal slid under the door, brushing against my feet, pulling me toward the darkness. The last thing I saw before the candle went out was the shadow bending over me, its hollow eyes grinning, whispering, "Welcome home."
The abandoned Whitmore Hotel had a reputation that kept everyone away, but curiosity drove me inside. The lobby was frozen in time, dust-covered furniture, broken chandeliers, and a thick, oppressive silence. I climbed the grand staircase, the wood groaning beneath each step. On the second floor, a faint music box melody drifted through the corridor, slow and warped, though no one was there. The doors along the hall began opening and closing on their own, revealing rooms that weren't empty. Pale figures sat in chairs, their faces hidden beneath long hair, rocking back and forth in unison. One room at the end of the hall glowed faintly. Inside, a mirror reflected not me, but dozens of shadowy versions of myself, all staring silently. Then a cold hand gripped my shoulder from behind. I spun around, nothing, but when I looked back at the mirror, one of the figures had stepped out, its lips twisting into a smile that wasn't mine. The music box stopped, and a whisper slithered through the air. "You can never leave."
The abandoned Ashwood Library was said to hold books that whispered secrets to anyone who dared open them. One rainy night, I slipped inside, flashlight in hand, and the smell of old paper and mildew hit me like a wall. I turned a corner and saw a book floating mid-air, pages flipping violently. When I approached, the words on the pages began forming sentences I couldn't read aloud without feeling my throat tighten. A cold breeze swept past, carrying dozens of whispered warnings. "Don't look behind you." My heart raced. I glanced over my shoulder, and the shadows between the shelves had thickened, crawling toward me like living smoke. I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of books, but when they hit the floor, each one flapped open like wings, circling me. The last thing I saw before my flashlight died was the shadow leaning in close, whispering in a voice that was mine. "Now you belong to the library."
The old Marston Woods cabin had been empty for decades. One stormy night, I ventured inside, the wooden floorboards groaning under my weight. The air was thick with mold, and something far sweeter, like rotting flowers. In the corner of the main room, a rocking chair moved on its own, slowly back and forth, though no one sat in it. I turned to the door, but it slammed shut, trapping me inside. Shadows crept along the walls, twisting into human shapes, each reaching for me with fingers that bent in impossible ways. From the attic, the sound of crawling footsteps descended, and a child's giggle rang out. Then hundreds of them, echoing from every corner. I tried to scream, but the air grew thick, pressing against my throat. The rocking chair stopped abruptly, and in the sudden silence, a pale figure stepped down from the corner, tilting its head unnaturally, and whispered with a smile that stretched impossibly wide. "Finally, you're home."
The old Crowley Manor had been abandoned for over a century, but its windows still glowed faintly on foggy nights. One evening, curiosity drew me inside, the door creaking as though warning me to turn back. Dust and cobwebs coated the grand staircase, and the air smelled of decay and old perfume. As I climbed, I heard whispers, soft at first, then urgent, calling my name from every corner. In the hallway, portraits of stern-looking ancestors stared down at me, their eyes seeming to follow my every move. Suddenly, the paintings' mouths moved, whispering words I couldn't understand, growing louder, angrier. From the end of the hall, a figure emerged, tall and gaunt, its face obscured by shadow. The air turned icy as it stepped closer, its breath rasping. "You were expected." I tried to run, but the doors slammed shut. The portrait's eyes glowed red, and the walls seemed to pulse with the sound of a heartbeat.
The abandoned Ravenscroft mansion had been left to rot for decades, but locals whispered that at night you could hear the piano playing in the main hall. One evening, curiosity drew me inside, the door creaking as if warning me away. Dust choked the air and cobwebs draped every corner. As I stepped into the grand hall, the piano keys depressed on their own, playing a slow, haunting melody. Shadows moved along the walls, twisting into human shapes, reaching toward me. From the staircase, a pale woman emerged, her eyes hollow, lips stretched in a silent scream. She floated closer, whispering, "You shouldn't be here." The floorboards groaned as dozens of ghostly figures appeared, circling me, their whispers merging into a single chilling voice. "Now you belong to us." The piano keys slammed down violently, and the last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me was her face, inches from mine, smiling in a way that wasn't human.